what we really should be talking about is that someone who's essentially starving because their body is so nutrient devoid and so inflamed, and there's so much oxidative stress and hormonal dysregulation that they're not in a position. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work and effort to kind of get that train back on course, or, get them back to a point where they're able to be metabolically flexible. It's not impossible, but it's a lot of work. And those are the conversations that I think really need to be had. Like, instead of, being in a position where, we just address symptoms, we don't address the root cause. Like, yeah, that person has diabetes, but they probably had diabetes for 10 years before it was diagnosed. And if we had talked to them about eating differently and getting some exercise and not smoking and getting more sleep, maybe they never would have had that diagnosis. And so I think on a lot of levels, we're missing opportunities with our patients. And that to me is really disheartening.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you as well.
All right. Remind me where you're located again, because I can't remember. I know you're somewhere.
Yeah, we were Washington, D.C. Now we're in Richmond. So we're about 2.5 hours south. And despite it being a lot warmer here, today it was 19 degrees when I got up. So I'm back in sweaters, but it's supposed to be in the 70s by the end of the week, which sounds great.
It does sound, yeah. I don't think we'll see 70s here for another month at least. I'm now in Washington State, so other side of the country. So, well, for those that aren't familiar with you, can you just kind of give us a quick background history on you?
Absolutely. So I'm a traditional allopathic Western medicine trained nurse practitioner, and all of my background in medicine has been in the emergency room and in cardiology. So I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie. But I think after becoming a parent and having a child with life-threatening food allergies, I got far more interested in the role of nutrition and health. And so I ultimately took a deep dive down the proverbial rabbit hole, started a PhD program, which spawned into doing a functional nutrition program, which I was far more interested in. And I left clinical medicine 6 years ago. And really, my business took off the ground running because there were so many women predominantly who felt like their needs weren't being met in the conventional system. And so I really love talking to people about eating less often, and certainly a very nutrient dense diet. I lean heavily carnivore-ish, but I am probably best known for a podcast called Everyday Wellness, as well as my second TED Talk that was on intermittent fasting. And so that kind of took things to a new level. And I've got a book that's actually being published tomorrow, which is really exciting / overwhelming. So it's really cool to connect with your community today. But I would say, if you were to describe me, I'm an NP that is woke about nutrition, and I lean heavily carnivore-ish. So I'm certainly super aligned with a lot of what you talk about. In fact, I was just telling my kids the other day that some of the reels that you're doing on Instagram, where, you have the vegan with, creating like a banana in an effort to make it feel like meat, I think is both hilarious and also disturbing at the same time. So definitely very aligned with your audience, and really grateful to be back again for a second time.
I was going to say, yeah, I make those little things. A lot of people like those. They're kind of goofy and they're kind of funny, but I mean, at the same time, it gets people engaged in a way, and it kind of points out the absolute absurdity of, people are taking what would be, stuff for the compost heap and trying to eat it, in
Right.
order to avoid eating meat by any means necessary. And we're seeing
Right.
that same level of preposterousness that's done on the corporate scale with all these sort of fake meat products that are coming in. And it's essentially the cheapest products they can possibly glom together, and they put enough flavoring in there and try to convince you it is somehow equivalent to what's in meat and what's in nutrition. So it is kind of I think there's a lot more to it than that. I know you've got a book behind you that says fasting, so I know that's part of your sort of system. And I mean, it's almost as if, because we eat so frequently and so often, going 6 hours without a meal is now considered weird.
Yes.
It's like, that's not, I mean, I just remember, and I still have this discussion with my better half, and, the kid comes home and he's hungry for a snack, and I'm like, look, I've got steaks are going to be ready in 2 hours. He can wait. And we go back and forth. But I remember as a kid, I would come home from school hungry, and my mom would say, dinner's in 2 hours, just wait, go play.
Right.
And it worked. And I don't think we do that these days. The second we even think about being hungry, we're constantly feeding that. How much of a role does meal frequency do you think play? I mean, my bent is, what you eat is going to be the most important thing, and then I think frequency comes in as a a part of that equation. But how much import do you put into that?
Well, I would say nutrition is where it starts. That's kind of the platform that I begin with, because when you're eating a nutrient dense diet, you're going to be satiated between meals. You're not going to feel the need to snack. But I do believe fervently that the way the processed food industry has really bastardized our conception of food and what meal frequency should be, not to mention the fact that there are legions of people that are really uncomfortable with the idea of being hungry. Like, that makes them very physically, emotionally uncomfortable. And I remind people that our bodies aren't designed to be comfortable. That's why we lift weights. That's why we, do cold showers. That's why we do high intensity interval training. That's why we, do, things that stress the body in beneficial ways, like not eating as frequently. And so I think the biggest issue that I really see is not only the degree of processed food that's infiltrated all of our lives. It's this misnomer. And I don't know if you were telling your patients this, but I certainly was, that, you have to eat frequently to stoke your metabolism. And I think what a tremendous detriment we have, imposed upon our patients and clients alike with the methodology that somehow eating more frequently is going to keep us healthier. But if you look at all, as I know you do, look at all the obesity trends, the metabolic disease, the metabolic inflexibility, which is nearly 90% of the population, you just start to realize that we shouldn't be the outliers. Like, we really should be the majority, and it really should be a small minority of people that are metabolically unhealthy. But unfortunately, eating really frequently, which keeps your insulin levels up, which puts you into this fat storage mode. It's really enlightening when people start to understand the interrelationship with hormones being dysregulated as being not only a prevailing reason why we are overfed and undermuscled, but also has a huge impact on our cravings and satiety. And I think the more people understand, and I'm sure you see examples, I love all the examples I see on your social media of people that have gone carnivore and have healed their gut, if they've gotten rid of an autoimmune issue. But to me, it really speaks to the fact that a lot of healthcare providers are starting to take a stand and are starting to say, what I was taught in my training is just wrong. And I myself have benefited from changing meal frequency, changing nutrient density, because I know when my teenage boys, I have all teenage boys who are very athletic, I know when they eat a really good dinner with like steak and some vegetables, and they're both student athletes, so they do eat a lot of carbs, but healthy carbs. They aren't looking for a meal when my husband and I go to bed. I don't know if you've experienced this, but we have, like, sometimes for them, it's first dinner, second dinner, because they didn't get enough in their first dinner, which would be enough food for me for like a whole day. But I think even starting younger, talking to our children and our loved ones about how the information that we learned when we were younger has really impacted us in profoundly negative ways. So I like that we're helping to change the narrative for so many people.
Yeah, and this is just an interesting topic when it comes to kids, and as you get kids into their teenage years, my understanding is kind of what they do early in life kind of sticks with them for the rest of their life. And so whatever patterns they sort of develop, that is what they, that's what they know, what they're used to, and they kind of do that. So if they're used to eating at all hours and, eating junk all the time, they're going to do that probably until they have a heart attack at 46 or 47 years old, until something convinces them otherwise. And so that's very important as parents to get after your kids. And we're seeing that being played out, unfortunately, on the other end, because these companies that try to hook people on this garbage are very effective at marketing towards children. They use the celebrities to tell you, hey, it's cool. You deserve your candy bar because you're a good person. You whatever, you did something for the environment. Now go reward yourself with a candy bar or something like that. We see that message being repeated over and over in some form or fashion. How do you, do you see that like I see it? Do you see this pushing towards the children to eat kind of, food that's not good for them?
I do. And it's interesting because like I said, I have all boys, so they were always doing sports, and, there was a sign up list for every parent, on the Saturday football game or the lacrosse game or whatever it was, there was the parent sign up to bring snacks. And it used to make me bananas because I was the parent that would bring bottled water and like home cooked, like I would pop popcorn or I'd cut up oranges or I'd bring a banana. Well, of course, when the kids were younger, that was not a big deal. But as they were getting older and someone's parent would bring Gatorade and Doritos and Cheetos, I was like, your kid just ran around for an hour. They certainly don't need that garbage. Like if they're hungry, go take them to get go eat like something real as opposed to all this processed junk. I think it's even becoming a larger issue. My older son plays football at the high school level, and it's something actually nice that the high school that my children go to, they actually provide dinner before their games, which I think is a great thing. But I cringe when I'm the parent that has to go help, because some local businesses will actually give them real food, like a real meal, which I think is fantastic. But the joke is that Chick-fil-A sponsored a dinner in the fall. And my older son was like, oh my gosh, I never get to eat this. I'm going to eat this. He was so sick. He was sick like during the game, after the game, the next day, because his body wasn't accustomed to eating that food. And he told me, he said, wow, like I had never experienced that before. But he said, I wouldn't want to eat that kind of food again. So he said, next time they serve Chick-fil-A, and I don't mean to pick on Chick-fil-A, but just using it as an example, I think on a lot of levels, my kids per se probably didn't get the exposure to a lot of the junk food that most kids do, because I, at a very young age, was making a lot of things from home and trying to source the healthiest options. But they also understand how to put a real meal together. Like I was always stuck with the the job of bringing like a salad. Like the moms would say, oh, you're probably the best at making a salad for the kids for them to have for dinner. Well, I would say 50% of the kids didn't want any salad as like an accompaniment to their dinner. They would take the starches. Like someone would make a big thing of like mac and cheese in a crock pot, where they would go after French fries. But, I would kind of encourage the kids, like, eat some protein, please eat some protein. There'd be like pulled pork, or maybe there were burgers. And I was always amazed at how they really gravitated towards starchy carbs, which in and of itself, if they're active, that's one thing. But with the understanding that what they really need to be doing is fueling their body a little bit differently. And so for me, I think it's a huge problem. I think a lot of parents don't even realize what's in Gatorade is one example, all the petrochemicals, artificial sugars, artificial flavors that, are doing wreaking a whole cascade of profoundly negative things on their health. So I think some of it's just an education piece. I think for a lot of others, they don't want to buck the system. And unfortunately, I was that mom that would kind of politely say, could we think about bringing some other options for these kids? I mean, as I'm thinking, my kids are like, woohoo, we're eating something my mom would never buy at home. I was like, enjoy it, because you're sure as heck not going to get that at home. But I do think that that's a huge problem. And I think if you start with healthier habits up front, I think that has a huge net impact on the choices that you're going to make when you leave home and when you go off on your own and you're making your own meals. Like both my kids actually know how to cook. They're both teens, but they both know how to cook, and they're actually quite good at what they do. And we've really encouraged them to like lean into that. Even though they're boys, they should learn how to cook. That's a life skill.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah,
That's okay.
I was commenting, I saw, talking about the cooking, I saw either a survey, a study that was done, and it was looking at sort of a younger generation, whether it's Generation Z or millennial generation, and the consumption of cereal had gone down significantly. And the thought was, well, maybe it's because, people are realizing how much sugar's in this cereal, and, maybe all these grains are not people are having trouble with. But that wasn't the reason. The reason was it was too much effort and work to pour a bowl of cereal, because you had to clean a dish and you had to get milk out of the refrigerator, and they'd rather just open a package and throw it in the trash and don't have to deal with the dishes. So that to me is really, they're too lazy even to make cereal.
Mhm.
Um, where was I going to go with that? With the kids, yeah. So I mean, I look, my kids, when I cook, like our dinner table, not everybody in the house eats a fully carnivorous diet. So dinner typically looks like, it's like some kind of protein. Is usually steak of some sort. Maybe there's chicken, maybe there's something else, but usually steak. And then there's usually some cheese that's been cut up, and then
Mhm.
there's usually some some sort of fruit, apples and stuff like that. My son will reflexively just kind of start reaching for the apples. And I've always got to remind him, hey, finish all the steak on your plate first and you can eat whatever you want. And so when he does that, and more times than not, if he eats all the steak, then he'll eat much less of the other stuff. And I think that's
Mhm.
just putting that protein source first in the meal. And there's studies on digestion that seem to, benefit, that seem to show less, glucose excursion, all that stuff.
Yep.
If you get the protein in your belly quicker, protein and fat in there quicker. So that is a good thing. My dog just wandered up here to say hi to me. So I'm going to pet him. Sorry about that.
Well, I can
Um,
tell you the one thing that's really interesting is that my teenager, especially my older one, he's 6 feet tall, but he's 145 pounds. So he's still pretty lean, but he's trying to put more muscle on. And so that's been a huge focus. And so trying to explain to him in terms of muscle protein synthesis and, really aiming for high quality protein and hitting those macros. I've been really impressed by, giving him, like, we prep a lot of protein. And so it might be bison, it might be beef, there might be chicken. We don't cook a lot of fish because my husband's super picky about fish and we have to cook it the day of or it doesn't get done. But my older son, I mean, this morning I came downstairs, he was eating leftover, steak from the night before. And I think he had some roasted potatoes and, he was heading off to school and he has lacrosse this afternoon. And he jokes about the fact that for him, he knows that the way to like fuel his morning is to go heavy on protein and then he's not hungry till lunch and he doesn't have those energy dips. Like he's so lean which is a wonderful thing that he's so lean. But as he is maturing and still developing, I have to remind him that, push that protein lever. That is so, so important. And I think for so many of us, we recognize, even as adults, I think most adults don't eat enough protein. I know I see all of the steaks that you make on social media, and I have to remind women, I'm like, you need 100 grams a day minimum. And most women are probably getting 25 or 30 grams, maybe with 2 meals a day. And so they're grossly under consuming protein. And so I think that's hugely impactful.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't lack for protein. I probably, some people argue I eat too much protein, although I think I disagree with that. There is, this one I ask you about. So, with regard to the fasting, a lot of people will say, I think, it's like some people say don't eat dinner, some people say don't eat breakfast. There's kind of debates back and forth. Personally, I mean, in my personal experience, I do better eating earlier in the day and not eating later in the evening. I sleep better. Do you have any thoughts on, if you're going to include intermittent fasting, is one better than the other? Is there any data to support that? Is it whatever works for you, or how do you approach that?
Well, I think obviously I always use the term bioindividuality rules, but we do know that we're more insulin sensitive earlier in the day. And if we're really looking for alignment with chronobiology, that I think it's always easier to eat, break your fast around brunch time, eat a meal, then eat a meal later in the afternoon. We do know that we have melatonin clocks that are also in our gut. So I remind people, like, when you eat too close to bedtime and you don't get good sleep scores or you just don't sleep well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that your body is trying to decide, like, should we secrete melatonin, should we secrete cortisol? We just had this bolus of food. The melatonin clocks are saying we're not going to bed right now because we're trying to process this food. And I just find that as we get older, many of us just naturally start becoming more aligned with eating during daylight and not eating at nighttime. Now, obviously, if someone works shift work, as I know both of you and I have both done throughout our careers, that can be a little more challenging. But I do find that people generally do better eating earlier in the day. And I know days I lift, like I took a 6 a.m. class this morning. And when just driving home, I was like, wow, I'm really hungry today. So if I'm hungry, I will break my fast earlier. And so I think I ate my first meal by 9:45, which is unusual. But I think we should just lean into those cues, like understanding and differentiating between true intrinsic hunger and not. But the insulin sensitivity thing is really important. If people wear a continuous glucose monitor or check their blood sugars with a glucometer, people are very surprised to know if you're going to have carbohydrates, eat them earlier in the day. Obviously, there's a lot of benign carbohydrates that are out there. I'm not referring to the processed Pop-Tarts. I'm referring to if you're going to have some fruit or if you're going to have a starchy vegetable, if that's part of your regimen, eat it earlier in the day. You're going to have better insulin sensitivity. And I know I'm very cognizant. Usually it's the first meal of the day. If I'm going to have carbohydrates. If it's been a heavier lifting day, like a leg day, I might lean into some carbs. Just for me personally, I usually have one higher carb day a week, but really kind of leaning into your body's cues, and then also responding accordingly. Like, is it a day you're lifting heavy in the gym and you've got a busy day, and you have to be really deliberate about when you're going to break your fast, versus a day when perhaps you're not as physically active. I know none of this group ever embraces that, but a day when you're not as physically active, maybe that's a day you'll break your fast later and lean into what your body is telling you.
Yeah, I just saw a study published on type 1 diabetics looking at insulin sensitivity. It seemed like it started to dip around. I mean, the insulin sensitivity started to improve 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. It continued to get better until about 4 or 5 p.m. Then
Hmm.
it started to go back up towards the insulin resistance side. So it seems
Yeah.
like that 9 a.m. to about 3 to 4 p.m. would be a better time, as far as disposing of glucose. Now, the other advantage is during the daytime is you can be active. You can
Yep.
walk after your meal, whereas you eat before you go to bed, you're just kind of laying there, and it's not much
Yeah.
you can do to control that. So if you're somebody that wants to check your insulin or wear a CGM, you know that you have the ability to modify your glucose disposal by activity. And speaking of which, do you find that well, I mean, I know this is a silly, obvious question, but I mean, I would assume you're a proponent of exercise, strength training, those types of things. How much does that have an impact on our overall well-being relative to diet? Do you think one's better than the other? One's more important? I know there's some people that will say, like Stu Phillips will say, it doesn't matter what your diet is, lift. Other people will say you can't outrun a bad diet. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
I think until middle age, I think people have a little bit more leeway and that they can get by with eating more inflammatory foods. I do think as people get north of 40, which I'm definitely there, that all of a sudden those inflammatory foods can be hugely problematic, and that loss of muscle with aging. So sarcopenia, you have to work really hard. Peak bone and muscle mass is in our 20s and 30s, and so I remind people all the time, the most important thing you can do is to maintain and build muscle. That, muscle is a glucose reservoir. Muscle is, as Gabrielle Lyon says, the organ of longevity. And I just remind people that the more muscle mass we have, the more insulin sensitive we will be. So for a lot of people, they find that it's a little harder to build muscle. I think especially as women are getting closer to menopause, as they're losing testosterone, that can sometimes be an issue, but it doesn't mean that it is impossible. And so I like a combination of strength training as well as being physically active. Like, I aim for 10 to 15,000 steps a day. And the irony is we used to make fun of the couples in our neighborhood that would walk after dinner. And we have become one of those couples that walks for, a mile and a half or 2 miles after dinner with our dogs because we enjoy it, but it's also great exercise. And I've seen, even in myself, I've got healthy blood sugar response, but even 20 to 30 points dip after eating dinner just by walking. And so I think it's a combination of both. I think, women and, men, as they go through andropause, they really have to shift their diets a bit. I think I certainly got away with a lot more in my 20s and 30s in terms of nutrition. I never ate terribly, but as I got into my 40s, I had to kind of kick some things out. Like, I don't eat gluten, I don't eat dairy. I don't judge anyone that does. They just don't agree with me anymore. And so I think we have to kind of adjust our diets and our physical activity to see where we are, not so that you're obsessive about it. I think if you're smart and you lift heavy a couple days a week, that makes huge improvements in, our body composition, and, can help maintain a lean, healthy body getting older. And unfortunately, and I'm sure you probably have seen this as well, I can't tell you how many women reach out to me on social media and they just say, well, my doctor said because I'm X age, this is just the way things are. Or my nurse practitioner said, because I'm this age, this is just to be expected. And I think there are countless examples of healthcare professionals and other people in the wellness industry that are doing really well in middle age. And I think a lot of it has to do with, when we choose to eat, how we choose to eat, what we choose to do with our bodies for physical activity. You can't be a couch potato at 50 and think that you're going to have this rocking bod and you're going to be super healthy. More than likely, the couch potatoes are finding that, they're succumbing to all these metabolic diseases, which don't have to be our destiny. And I think that's really one of the main points that I think is so important, is for people to understand there's a lot that we have in our control. And I think it's important to just understand that there are a lot of things we can do to shift the paradigm. We don't have to buy into that mentality that middle age is our destiny, and we're all going to have paunchy bellies and struggle with weight loss and, really struggle with sleep. Like, that shouldn't be the norm. I think back to, my grandmother was a nurse, and my grandmother used to just tell me, oh, once you hit a certain age, you just don't sleep well anymore. And I was like, no, that shouldn't be our destiny. There has to be, a workaround or a hack, or there has to be something we don't know enough about that is impacting, some of those lifestyle markers. It doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, I think that, the point about walking after meals, if you go like other cultures, like you go to Europe, you go see, and it's pretty typical. You see everybody's walking after meals, and, it's one of those things. It's kind of a social thing. You just get out there.
Mhm.
Obviously weather is going to be an impact on this. It's tough to go walking around in a blizzard, but assuming the weather's nice, that's a pretty nice way to finish off a meal. And I often, I've got, like I said, these guys are great. These are great exercises. These are great
Yep.
things because they make you take them for walks. And so it's a great thing to do. Yeah. Your point about, this midlife gut, the dad bod, the whatever, I don't know if there's an equivalent of women. We're seeing a big body positivity thing in women
Mhm.
more so than, love your body. And they've got these morbidly obese women on the cover of a magazine saying healthy at any size and all that stuff. I find that to be, a detrimental message, quite honestly. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I mean, it's not that these people need to be attacked or denigrated, but the same point, to say that is a healthy at any size is problematic. Do you have any issues with that?
I do. I have to be careful because I've gotten skewered on Twitter talking exactly about this. I think that there are individuals who are really kind of struggling with their body image. And so they perceive anyone talking out against this body positivity messaging is attacking them. And I would say, especially as a healthcare provider, I really genuinely want people to be as healthy as they can be, to be as metabolically flexible as possible. And so, do I think that, shaming and blaming is the way to go? Absolutely not. But I also think when I see someone who's morbidly obese, that's someone who their hormones are really dysregulated. They're not getting hunger cues. They're not satiated. I look at it as a point of education, but I don't think that we should, as a society, embrace that. Being metabolically unhealthy is a positive thing. I think if anything, it's really a cry for help. It's a public health threat, meaning, the sequelae of being morbidly obese. We all bear the brunt of that as a country. And I say that with love and with grace, that, ultimately, if we as a society are not doing a good enough job with prevention, if we're not intervening at an earlier age, if we're not talking with our patients about lifestyle medicine, then we've really failed. And so, to me, I used to celebrate when my patients could get off medications. And, 6+ years ago, that wasn't really a thing. And now I see so many healthcare professionals that are doing exactly that. But in cardiology, as you can well imagine, I had patients on 20, 30 medications. You'd add a medication for blood pressure, and then they'd have to be on something to supplement their potassium. And then you'd add another drug because then they would get gout because they were on a diuretic. And so it was like this constant, it's like you're playing chess, like, okay, you get a side effect, let's add another drug. And so I think it's so much more impactful if we can have the ability, the time, and the resources to encourage people to take better care of themselves and really intervening at younger ages, because it's much harder. Like, I used to tell my patients that were in their 50s, you can't eat like you're 18. Like, none of us can unless you're 18. And so at some point you have to change what you're doing. And it is much harder to change the lifestyle piece, go to bed earlier, change your diet, exercise, prioritize stress management. That's much harder than taking a pill. But we've conditioned patients, look at all the pharmaceutical industry has done such a masterful job. I say masterful in quotes, of identifying new pills that are going to fix someone's problem, that we now have people who are conditioned to believe that a pill is going to solve it all. Like, I had patients that would say to me, Cynthia, I really respect you and I admire what you're trying to suggest I do, but just give me the pill and I'm not going to stop smoking. I'm not going to change my diet. I'm not going to sleep more. And so I think we've really done a tremendous disservice on a lot of levels. But I agree with you. The body positivity movement makes me cringe a little bit, because what we really should be talking about is that someone who's essentially starving because their body is so nutrient devoid and so inflamed, and there's so much oxidative stress and hormonal dysregulation that they're not in a position. I mean, it's going to take a lot of work and effort to kind of get that train back on course, or, get them back to a point where they're able to be metabolically flexible. It's not impossible, but it's a lot of work. And those are the conversations that I think really need to be had. Like, instead of, being in a position where, we just address symptoms, we don't address the root cause. Like, yeah, that person has diabetes, but they probably had diabetes for 10 years before it was diagnosed. And if we had talked to them about eating differently and getting some exercise and not smoking and getting more sleep, maybe they never would have had that diagnosis. And so I think on a lot of levels, we're missing opportunities with our patients. And that to me is really disheartening. And the last thing that I want to add to that is, prevention is something that we don't do a great job with here in the United States. We wait until someone's got a diagnosis, and then we put them on a pill, and then, they're on that treadmill of the proverbial treadmill that, they then have another diagnosis and they get another pill, and then they end up hospitalized and they're on 5 more medications. And so it just starts this process of, one medication becomes 10, and that becomes the norm. I'm sure you saw that with your patients in orthopedics, that how many patients came to you that were on 10 or 20 medications by the time they were 55 years old?
Yeah, we had, and some of them would have literally allergies. There were 15, 20 medications long, which mean they had tried all these medicines and proved to be allergic to it. And then you just kind of saw these pieces. It's like you felt like there's nothing you can do because they're on all these medications. So it's very frustrating. And I think your point about prevention, I mean, we do lip service, basically. I think that the healthcare system provides lip service for prevention. They don't put any teeth into it.
No.
There's no help for these folks. Even if you told them and you knew what to tell them to do, and most of them don't, there's no way to really facilitate that or hold them accountable, or to provide tools for them to be successful. It's very, very hard to do. And so that is frustrating. Somebody commented, instead of chess, it's more like whack-a-mole. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Yes.
One symptom comes up and you keep throwing another drug at it. And
Yeah.
in orthopedics, we weren't a particularly drug intensive field. I mean, it's
Mhm.
mostly surgical kind of stuff. There's some antibiotics, a few pain pills, mostly that, anti-inflammatories here and there. But whereas cardiology, obviously you're dealing with a lot more. There's a lot more medicines, a lot more pharmacology that's going on with that. What do you, as far as, you've got this, tremendous problem with obesity, tremendous problem with, people relying on drugs. What do you think's the way out of that? You think there's a way? Do you think there's a way forward? I mean, how do we? Because anyone that's paying attention, it's just getting worse. I mean,
Yeah.
our obesity rates are going up, our chronic disease rates are going up, autoimmune rates are going up. I mean, on and on and on. I mean, the quality of our diet is going worse and worse every year. And it's almost as if, and the industry is telling you, you need to eat more of our processed stuff. In fact, I'm seeing articles saying that, unfortunately, the only way to have a sustainable diet is to eat processed food. I mean, literally, there's articles going out there saying that. To
Mhm.
me, is just jaw-droppingly insane. Do you see a way around this, or how do we correct this course of action?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a multi-pronged issue. We've got, the processed food industry is in bed with the USDA. I mean, there are so many issues. It's so proliferative. It's not just the processed foods; it's the insecticides and herbicides that are sprayed on crops, which destroy the gut microbiome. They punch holes in the small intestine and impact leaky gut. I think we as a society have to demand more, like not only just the clinicians, but patients, because I remind my kids, I just say, I always remind them, your generation may not see the degree of health. And I'm not saying my generation is super healthy based on things statistically that I'm seeing, but longevity, like morbidity and mortality, I mean, it's frightening. So I think it has to be a public health effort. I think in many ways, the insurance industry has really driven this kind of concept of see as many patients as you can in a short amount of time. So no one really develops real relationships with their patients. They don't have the time to be able to do the education. So whether or not that involves health coaches partnering with healthcare providers, where maybe you're seeing a healthcare provider and the healthcare provider is able to spend a little bit more time with the patient, getting a plan together. And then a health coach or a nutritionist is able to sit down and help map out how to get from point A to point B. I really feel like there needs to be a lot of boots on the ground, that it can't just be the clinicians. It has to be a whole kind of societal shift about expectations. And actually, I think for so many people, they're so addicted to processed foods and their palate is so desensitized to what real food tastes like, that there has to be a little bit of a commitment by the consumer or the patient, along with industry-wide changes. And I really feel on a lot of levels that um, unfortunately, a lot of the regulatory agencies and certainly the processed food industry, the insurance companies, they want to make money. They are concerned first and foremost, about making profits. I just did a deep dive into the Sacklers and the opioid crisis. And if anyone hasn't read, Dope Sick or seen I think it's on Hulu. It's really fascinating. So the only reason why I interject that is that it really brings to light that there are a lot of greedy people that are focused solely on not improving patient care, not improving anything other than profitability. And so I do think that there is a way out, but I think it's going to require a lot of multi-layered efforts. And part of that has to start with reimbursement. I think a lot of healthcare providers, and certainly, I started in healthcare in 1997, and things were very different when I first started. And so, from my perspective, the things that physicians were talking to me about reimbursement were very different in 1997, 98 than they were in 2015, 2014, 2012. And so I think that there has to be some allocation of resources by insurance companies to be able to permit healthcare providers more time with their patients in a very organized, systematic fashion. And maybe it turns into there are incentives. And when I say incentives, I'm speaking kind of broadly, not a punitive type thing, but incentives to try to get people rerouted. But it's tough. I mean, changing lifestyle stuff, it has to be, usually it's a sickness, someone's passed away, someone's had a major life diagnosis, or they've just had an awakening that all of a sudden they have this powerful realization that they have to change things. I think for a lot of people, they're just numb. I think the past 2 years has been very challenging for most people. And, we're not headed in the right direction. I actually genuinely fear for my children, my grandchildren, future grandchildren. I might add, I'm too young to be a grandmother. Future grandchildren, about the net impact of where things are going, because it can't be supported. All of us that are healthy, we are supporting the healthcare system right now, because we're not a drain on the healthcare system. But when I look at our insurance premiums, how they've just gone up and up and up every single year, even though we don't use much healthcare at all. And it's because we have an increasingly metabolically unhealthy population. And so we all bear the brunt of people's lifestyles. And so I always say it's everyone's problem. We can't put our blinders on and pretend that, the person down the street who has been metabolically unhealthy for 10 years, that doesn't impact all of us, because they're the ones that are going to be, using the most healthcare dollars. They're the ones that are on more medications. There will be more hospitalizations. Maybe they're having an amputation. Maybe they're, lost their vision. Maybe, there's so many things that can happen with that. And so a very long-winded explanation for why I think it has to be a multi-pronged approach. It has to be both a public and a private sector involvement. But my greatest concern is I don't think the government and the private sector there's no incentives for them to do that. They want us to continue using healthcare resources. They want us to continue buying their hyper processed, hyper palatable foods, and they want us addicted. That's what they want. They're not thinking about what's best for our health.
Yeah, as you probably know, I've not shied away from making inflammatory comments on social media. And I said something the other day. I was on Twitter and I said, look, if your physician is not routinely getting his or her patients off medications, they kind of suck. And I think, I mean, I think we hold that standard seriously as consumers of the healthcare industry and say, look, you're not a good physician if you keep putting me on medications. If you can't get me off of these medications, then you're probably not a very good physician. I think we go into that mindset. That's part of what we're trying to do with our company. But
Mhm.
if we go into there and start to say, look, I'm not going to give you a 5-star review if all you did was renew my medications. Maybe if you get me off 2 or 3 of them, you might get that 5-star review. And I think if we go into
Mhm.
it with that attitude, it might change the perception because it's doable. I mean, I see it every single day, and as you do
Mhm.
too. You see people coming off medications all the time, and to think that these people are like, and one of the pushbacks I get is from the physician saying, well, the patients don't want to do it; they just want the pill. And while that's true, that doesn't absolve you from it doesn't give you an out. It doesn't say, well, just because they want the easy route out, I'm going to give that to them. You should say you should convince them some way or facilitate it. And I think that's you can't just it's being lazy. It's lazy medicine in my view, and it doesn't suit anybody. It doesn't really suit people. And the other thing, we have all these super expensive medications. I'm thinking about for things like some of these autoimmune conditions where we've got these biologic agents, which are,
Mhm.
infusions are thousands and thousands of dollars every month. And insurance paid for it, so I don't worry about it. But you're right. Yeah, insurance paid for it, but guess who pays for it ultimately? We all end up paying for it. It just drives the cost up, and we all pay for it in our insurance premiums, our taxes in some cases. And so, and the drug companies still making all the money on this stuff.
Mhm.
So it's kind of one of those crazy types of things. Do you find that? I mean, as far as well, I guess the people that come to see you they've already made up their mind. You're not, how do we get more people to sort of make up their mind? I mean, I guess that's the question. If you got, I mean, obviously you're not going to change unless you want to. But how do we get more people to want to do that? Is there a way we can try to convince more people that hey, your lifestyle is killing you, and how do we get that message out there? You think?
Well, I think, now we have more and more healthcare providers that are speaking openly. They have, podcasts and forums that people are joining and they're inspired. So I think we have to continue to share all the progress that we're seeing our patients and clients making. I think that's incredibly inspiring. I'd also say we just have to continue to inspire our colleagues to speak out. Like 6 years ago, my colleagues thought I was nuts that I left clinical medicine to start my own business. But now I have people every day that are reaching out that are saying, I want to do what you do. Tell me how to do it, which always makes me laugh. And I said, well, I'm a bit of a rebel, which is what got me to where I am. But I'll give you one example. Towards the last 2 years I was practicing in cardiology, I was starting to read more and more research about total cholesterol and how, if it's under 100, and yes, there were plenty of people on statins and other cholesterol lowering medicines who had very low total cholesterol. And I started saying to my colleagues, but everything I'm reading is talking about morbidity and mortality under a certain number, not to mention the fact they're going to have no libido, they're going to have no sex hormones, they're not going to feel good. And so I started reducing medication. And I actually took a lot of flack from some of my colleagues about doing this. And I said, we can't be on autopilot. We have to, as clinicians, evolve, shift, and change. And I think that's so critically important. So, from my perspective, we have to be encouraging that we are lifelong learners as clinicians, and the same goes for consumers. That by the time women come to me, they're fed up with all of the symptoms of like middle age. They're tired, they've gained weight, they've been convinced by everyone else that there's nothing wrong with their thyroid and they don't need hormone replacement therapy, amongst a myriad of other things. And which is not to suggest that hormone replacement therapy is right for everyone. Let me just slide that caveat in. But I think nearly everyone who gets to a point of utter frustration, it's because they've been convinced that they're supposed to just accept things as they are. And I would encourage anyone, whether you're live on this call or you're watching a replay, I tell everyone when I went gluten free, I got rid of an autoimmune issue just from going gluten free. My dermatologist did not believe that my psoriasis went away because I stopped eating gluten. But then she actually started to shift her perspective. And now I would say is probably one of the more progressive dermatologists that I've ever met. And she said, I never would have believed it, but now I do. And so understanding that food really is nutrition and really does impact our health in really profound ways. And so I think as people become more aware of the possibility that our food choices are killing us slowly or, allowing us to live pretty darn good lives. I think we just have to continue speaking out. We need to continue being a voice. We need to be disruptors in a respectful way so that we're sharing with people. These are our experiences. This is my N of 100. This is my N of 20. This is my N of 1,000. No, it wasn't done in a research institution. Doesn't mean the findings aren't significant enough that we need to look a little bit deeper. It should be the basis for us then taking it and allowing the researchers to go out and do more research so that they can publish the findings and really, turn the tide. I got my brother to try a carnivore diet today after 3 years of debate. That's awesome. I think it's really important that we continue to speak out, because the one thing I can tell you without question is that any licensed healthcare provider that's out there kind of cutting against the norm of our industry, you're going to take heat, you're going to take some flack, but ultimately you're probably going to inspire other clinicians to look a little more deeply, to think a little bit more differently, to, pivot away from what we trained with. I don't know about you, but I tell people all the time, I sometimes ask forgiveness, like I didn't know better, but now I do. And I think that's a pretty important distinction as a clinician. Like, we're supposed to be lifelong learners, but I encounter physicians and nurses and other healthcare professionals nearly every day who it makes them angry. They don't want us to be speaking out against, kind of traditional methodologies. And I always say, like, that's not science. Science is designed to question. It's designed to change. It's designed to, not embrace dogma. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, about having made plenty of mistakes in past career. We all continue to make
Mhm.
mistakes as time goes by, but I can remember specifically a patient of mine telling me that her knees hurt when she was eating gluten. And I honestly thought she was crazy. I didn't believe her. I was like, this is BS, because I had no idea. This is 15 years ago when I was in the midst of my, heal with steel, cut everything open, you fix it as a surgeon. I don't want to hear about the nonsense about you talking about your diet. I mean, and
Mhm.
that's quite honestly, that's how many physicians operate, particularly surgeons. We just don't have time for that stuff. And then, obviously, I obviously changed my way of thinking, and it's one of those things where I'm sitting here now. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by training, and yet now I've got people with Crohn's disease and multiple sclerosis and refractory depression that I'm helping to get better. It shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't be the guy having to do this stuff, but it is what it is. And like I said, if the other folks can't figure it out, then somebody has to. And so
Mhm.
fortunately, like I said, now there are gastroenterologists that realize that nutrition has a role on Crohn's disease, and there are psychiatrists and psychologists that realize nutrition has a role in mental health disorders, on and on and on. But I mean, it's kind of like, why am I in this role when I should, honestly, I should be replacing people's knees. That's what I was trained to do. But again, you're, as a physician in general, you get this background and you kind of get a smattering of a little bit of everything. And certainly this is more fulfilling for me. Certainly I
Mhm.
enjoy hearing about all these great transformations we get. There was a question in here, and I guess to your personal experience, have you seen someone who is morbidly obese as a kid? We're seeing more and more of that these days. Unfortunately, I can't remember what the statistics on kids are, but I know the obesity rates of kids are like something like 20-25%, and morbid
Mhm.
obesity is going to be a fraction of that, maybe 2-3%. Children that start out morbidly obese that ever attain normal weight in adulthood. Have you seen that occur?
I have, but it's a lot I mean, I look at it, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of Pottinger's cat. So usually, like obese parents will beget obese children, and it's like the epigenetic changes that occur with kind of chronic habitual obesity. Have I seen it? Yes, but it really requires, because if a child is obese, it is because of the environment in which they live in. And so, a child doesn't have a job, they can't like get in the car and go to the grocery store and get healthy, nutritious food. It's really oftentimes a reflection. Maybe the parent doesn't know that the food they're eating is there's a interrelationship with that and obesity. And I speak from a very, very good friend of mine that I grew up with, who talked about, her childhood obesity and how hard she had to work as an adult to not be obese, and how she's seen some of her children even struggle with this. And so I do think some of there's some genetic susceptibility, but so much of it is related to lifestyle pieces. And so you have to work very, very hard. There was a wonderful young woman I met at an event I spoke at in Las Vegas last October. And she had lost, I want to say, over 50 pounds, and just looked like she was just radiating joy. She was so happy and feeling so good about herself. And she had predominantly done that with a ketogenic low carb diet. And she was saying to me, it's like every day it's an effort to make good choices. She said, it's so ingrained in my kind of mindset that every day I have to continue to make the harder choice, because it becomes, every day is easier and every day is a little bit harder, because those mechanisms, whether they're maladapted or otherwise, like eating for comfort versus hunger, not really understanding what a nutrient dense diet is, then finding that out. She always says, like, it's always kind of in the back of her head that she still thinks of herself sometimes as that morbidly obese young woman, but now is in a position where she's able to inspire others because she's made such incredible strides. So yes, I do think it's certainly possible. It is certainly not easy. And I do think it involves a lot of reframing, not only about your own perception of your body, but also reframing your relationship with food and your lifestyle. And certainly kudos go out to anyone that is in that position, really trying to make better choices for themselves and for their loved ones.
Yeah, I think, we often hear, the genetic argument. I'm more of the sort of belief that it's, we have impacts on in intrautero,
Hmm.
when the baby is exposed to high levels of glucose, they may be
Hmm.
born insulin resistant, and then we start them off and on, like if you're, a lot of people go into formula. If you look at the formula, the ingredients list on formula right now, it's shocking to see
Yeah.
corn syrup and soybean oil and some it's just a 30 list long ingredients, and then they go from there to goldfish crackers and this,
Hmm.
all this stuff. It's just a really bad way to start your life. And then you literally start out insulin resistant from day one. And then I
Hmm.
think those poor kids end up, by the time they're 10 years of age, they're 160, 170 pounds overweight. And then it's almost, you get to see the rest of their life playing out in front of them. Diabetes at 30, heart disease at 45, their gallbladder comes out sometime in their mid 30s. I mean, you can just kind of script it out if they don't intervene there. And so it's really a challenging thing. Do you have any concerns about, I mean, we're seeing a lot of, like I use New York City as an example. The mayor now has now declared Friday is vegan Friday. The one before made meatless on Friday. So now I mean, it's like no nutrition every day. When are these kids going to get nutrition?
I
Are
know.
you seeing a lot of that in your local community? And is there anything that, are your kids being impacted? I mean, I was reading through my kid's English homework the other. I'm helping him with his, he's fourth grade is he in fourth grade English, and one of the things was a healthy, nutritious diet. And of course, it was no mention of meat whatsoever. It's just like, wait a minute. I mean, because I'm always preaching to him and my kids, look, you got to eat some meat and food.
Yeah.
But do you see anything with your local area with them pushing on the kids about going plant based?
Well, the irony is, I was always asked by my children's elementary school to do presentations. Like, it was just something that I loved actually doing. And so sometimes it would be about the sugar content and like orange juice. And I had this whole mock up, and everyone, it always blew everyone's minds. But they asked me one year to come in and do a presentation about my plate, which I very honestly told them up front, I don't believe in this. I'm not aligned with it. Those poor kids' minds were blown when I said, you don't need all these grains and carbohydrates. What you need for satiety is this, this, and this. I'm sure I probably confused a whole generation of children, because it was the antithesis. Thankfully, where we are, they're still not doing these meatless meals like the public school system in New York is doing, which I think is a travesty, because so many children are dependent on those meals because they otherwise would go hungry. The whole concept of Meatless Monday to me just speaks to Carbohydrate Monday, because what are you going to what are you going to use in place of the protein that you otherwise would have consumed? So I do have concerns about that. I know people will say, well, meat prices are going up, and that's a concern. And I always say, but there's so many inexpensive proteins that you can have. It doesn't have to be, and I love steaks. Let me be clear. I love steak, but it doesn't necessarily have to be steak. I mean, you could use sardines. I mean, there's so many inexpensive protein options that, I don't necessarily buy into that argument either. But I do find it concerning that my plate aligns itself with a very carbohydrate dense diet. And we recognize what carbohydrates do to our blood sugar dysregulation and insulin resistance and leptin resistance and all these things. In a metabolically healthy person, you can have some carbohydrates. If you're not metabolically healthy, which is 90% of the adult population, and you've already stated that, we're seeing rates of type 2 diabetes and NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in children, which is a travesty because you are setting yourself up. I just finished Rick Johnson's book about fructose. I just read Drop Acid by Perlmutter. And you just start to understand how, these processed sugars, especially high fructose corn syrup, is profoundly detrimental and toxic to the body. So on a lot of levels, I get very concerned when public health people are trying to kind of push the narrative about a plant-based agenda with children, many of whom are in underserved communities, and the only meals they're getting are at school. So you're already taking, a subsidized meal, which probably isn't all that particularly healthy. If you look at, my son, thankfully my kids bring lunches, but when they were younger and they would take photos of like what was being served, it was always tons and tons of carbs. If it was a protein, it was fried. There was like juice. I mean, juice is like one of the worst things you can drink. But it was like lots of sugar, lots of carbohydrates. I always say they were giving these kids dessert for breakfast. They were giving them dessert at lunch. And every other snack in between was like another dessert. And I said, it's one thing if you choose to have dessert once a week or once a month or wherever it is you decide to do it and you're metabolically healthy. But if that's what you're eating all day long, you're not setting yourself up to be able to sit quietly in a school environment and learn. How many kids are dealing with ADHD or they're on medication to help with behavioral changes that are largely a byproduct of the artificial colors and dyes and other things that are in a lot of these hyper palatable foods. They're being served at school. So I am not a proponent of my plate, and I'm definitely not a proponent of these kind of meatless meal servings that are once a week, especially for public school kids, that may be the healthiest thing that they eat, or maybe their only meal they're getting that day.
Oh, I muted myself. So sorry, Cynthia. I was going to say, I'm running out of time. I've got to do a consult in about 2 minutes, but I wanted to just comment, there's a pushback. I see these sugar apologists, these dietitians coming out and saying it's fine in moderation. The problem is most people can't moderate these foods. And so if you can't eat something in moderation, you're best off not eating it at all, in my view. Where do people go to find out more? I see your book in the background.
Yep.
So obviously they can get that, but do you have a website? Do you have a social media? Go ahead and share that if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you. So www.cynthiathurlow.com. It's intermittent fasting transformation IF 45. It goes to publication tomorrow. And you can pick it up on Amazon, Target, Barnes and Noble, or your local bookstore. And you can certainly find me I'm probably most active on Instagram. I'm a little snarky on Twitter, so be forewarned. And I also have a free Facebook group called Intermittent Fasting Lifestyle / my name. And I always welcome connecting with your listeners and followers.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have a great day. Keep up the good work, and hopefully talk down the road.
Sounds good. Have a great day. Thank you.
See everybody tomorrow. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.